Sana, thank you so much for being on the show. I really enjoyed meeting you through my co-founder, Justin. And I remember just jumping on that call and thinking, wow, she's got incredible energy, not to mention your like just deep expertise in this category. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks, George. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And again, shout out to your guitars and your artwork here in the back. I know we were chatting a little bit about that
Thank you.
pre-recording. Why don't you take a quick second to just kind of introduce yourself? I think it's really cool to go into that just because you have such a vast array of knowledge and experience that I think is super important.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much for asking. So, I've been doing product marketing now, it's going to be 17 years. And so, coming out of New York City, the software as a service space, I think the West Coast was lucky. They had all the great startups and all the big tech companies emerging from there. And so, there's a small opportunity where Silicon Valley started to develop here on the East Coast as well. And so, there's a lot of like business related products, a lot of like Marcoms sort of products. And so if you could imagine, like I'm coming into the space of software as a service and really excited about it. And I discovered product marketing as I sort of stepped into this world. And so working at companies like Sprinkler that just went IPO a few years ago, usually being the only product marketer at the company to really build out product marketing functions. I worked in various different like ad tech spaces, Marcom, and then stepping into the world of big tech. So that's been my life for the past 5, 6 years, coming into companies like PayPal, Facebook, Amazon, and doing product marketing now at a larger scale and taking many B2B products to market. So it's going from like the startup mentality of wearing a bunch of different hats to now also wearing a bunch of different hats, moving fast, and then working with a lot of different
Mm.
companies. And so I've taken over 50 plus products to market,
Holy
lots of
cow.
actual platforms themselves, right? Because then in a platform, you're not selling only one feature or product, it's the entire experience. And they've been worth over billions of dollars. And so I have lots of different points of views on product marketing from various different levels. So I'm excited to share it with you.
Yeah, and just real quick, I wanted to highlight as well the fact that you're a founder of the Product Marketing Magazine. So maybe you can tell folks a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you. I I almost forgot to mention that. So I was excited to put together a product marketing magazine, and it was sort of like a twofold experience for me with the Product Marketing Institute. And so I saw all these holes in product marketing, just similar to the way Asset Mule sees it as an underserved market. And what can we do to help the community of product marketers? And so seeing the gaps, I started to write about where I feel like things need to get a bit better and what we can do, and then interviewing a lot of different thought leaders. And so some of them include Scott Brinker, who's the father of Martech technology, which was really exciting. And he was very sweet and down to earth. And then also Andy Cunningham, who I call the mother of product marketing in so many different ways, because she was one of the first product marketers in the industry and she got to work with Steve Jobs. She was his first product marketer. And so lots of different exciting things there. And then with the Product Marketing Institute, it's helping people learn about product marketing and being able to implement it. So we're not just talking about concepts, but what are all the skill sets you need and how do you build your own strategy for your own specific product marketing scenario, right? Because one size doesn't fit all.
Mm.
What might work for Asset Mule may not work for another company, and so on and so forth. So it's really exciting, and that's the passion of product marketing for me. So thank you for asking.
It's interesting because, as we've dug into kind of our journey here at Asset Mule, we've run into this nuance, which is, you sort of alluded to it, which is a product marketer at X organization does different things than and prioritizes different jobs to be done, right? Than someone at a different organization with the same title. So it's kind of it's sort of a tricky thing at times, especially as we've been trying to find product market fit and really nail, the type of organization that would be the ideal customer profile for us, at least here in V1. And, and is kind of a nuanced thing, because if you think about sales development, right? Like I remember being, kind of early in sales development when that whole, movement was happening. And like your SDRs are going to, book meetings and do cold calls and et cetera, no matter what size organization. And so, to build a tool for them, at least at that time, felt a lot more straightforward than what we're trying to accomplish right now. Because, to your point earlier, certain organizations might not even have sales enablement, right, on their product marketing as a like priority, right? They might have another organization. Of course, PMMs will work with that, that team. So, it's kind of created a pretty interesting dynamic.
Yeah, it's a good point, and it's exciting to also get your perspectives too as we both talk together because you have such a strong sales background. And I think the point in also what you're describing, right? Like product marketing is something that's, I want to say, almost fairly new, right? Because it was Google that was the one that really started that out, and they really started fleshing out the role back in the 90s. And so they were kind of the spearheads and leading it. And then you sort of see this concept being adopted by so many different companies, and then they're trying to implement it in their own ways. And so, what are you as a product marketer? Are you the person that's doing sales enablement? Are you the person that's doing customer research? Are you just putting PowerPoints and case studies together, right? And I say that almost with a little joke because it's such a strong reality for a lot of people where that's how the role is interpreted. But then sales enablement too, right? Almost like a concept that's being adopted by so many different companies. And then what exactly is a baseline? Like, what are we trying to do with it? And it's interesting, the interpretation of it, depending on the roles and the goals of the company. Are they trying to go IPO really quick in the next few years?
Mm.
Are they trying to be established and really now serve their industry or vertical and just sort of keep expanding wide? And so that sort of changes a lot of the nuances then when you look at product marketing and product marketing with the sales enablement function. So I'm happy to dive into that with you.
Yeah, well, what would you say are, from your perspective, and I know this is going to be sort of, it depends, right? But if you had to highlight some of the key responsibilities, of a product marketer, and how they should sort of like balance those jobs to be done, in a function that has potentially so much on their plate, and they got to sit in between different organizations and kind of, help everyone play nice, right? Like, how would you be able to kind of figure out what those key responsibilities are?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think one of the things that I would advise any product marketer, whether they're new or veteran, come in, really take advantage of your onboarding. I know that a lot of companies, especially startups, want you to hit the ground running, but there's a lot of information you need to have in place, right? So, what do the founders value? What are their goals? What are the goals of the customer? So, those are sort of like two gaps that you have to fill in quickly and sort of try to triage into your role, right? So, it's like, what so are we trying to go IPO really quickly? Are we trying to establish ourselves and really serve like one market or a set of customer segments? Okay, so now that you have an idea of that from speaking to the founders, dive deeper into what is it that the customers want? What are their needs, right? Ultimately, the role of a product marketer is to create stories and narratives and all efforts around this, including sales enablement, to serve the needs of the customer. And so, if you don't take that opportunity, whether you try to fight for it and ask for it to sit in front of the customers and talk to them, can be a really missed opportunity in terms of then what becomes outputs like sales enablement, right? So, like, why am I creating this PowerPoint? What exactly does the customer want? Where do they live? Like, what do their day to days look like? And, from those roles, you sort of, I break it down in my course into like three pieces: the research piece, the strategy piece, and the execution piece.
Mm.
And so, from a research standpoint, it's some of these things that I'm mentioning. Then, from a strategic standpoint, it starts to become, how am I going to speak to those customers and like what type of sales enablement collateral, for example, can I prioritize there? So jumping into that, right? PowerPoint, I say with a smile on my face because it is a necessary evil, but at the same time, it's not the only one stop buck there of what you need to do. Everyone needs like a pitch deck, right? If you're a salesperson and you're coming to me, you're going to need something to be able to speak to the customers. Those pitch decks start becoming very nuanced depending on what, uh, where the customer is in their sort of sales cycle and what kind of information you need. So the more sophisticated you start getting with your sales enablement, you can start differentiating and specializing the decks. Other staples I think that are always needed are things like case studies, right? Because you can't just tell a customer a good idea. You have to show them the so what and the why and like how we've helped other customers in similar situations. You always want to kind of approach the customer with some sort of similarity that you've helped the other customers with. And so I think these are staples, super important. And sales enablement is always going to be like the big sort of thing in the middle, because that's how a product marketer will be able to express the storytelling and the messaging and the positioning. And then there are going to be other things, but I would say that that's like the main one, along with some of this background work that you're doing, including the research that I mentioned.
Well, speaking of sales enablement, of course, we're pretty fond of this, set of jobs to be done, or could be also an entire function dedicated to it. What would you say from your perspective? And again, you've seen it across the gamut, right? Almost 2 decades. What are some of those key issues that product marketers face when engaged in supporting sales enablement? And maybe we could also like dive into some of the ways to actually work through them or overcome them. I know, sales enablement is really like, or I would say, alignment is really key to from my humble experience thus far, is so important to sales enablement being successful.
That's a great question. That's the $1 million question of the hour, right? And when I spoke to you and your co-founders, including Justin, I got super excited that someone is using Asset Mule to tackle this pain point in sales enablement, specifically for product marketers. And let's talk about that for a second, right? Asset Mule is making it super easy for all product marketers to be able to update their assets fairly quickly. I want to go back to my favorite movie, George, The Matrix. And in the first Matrix,
I love it too, by
um,
the way.
you
It's
know,
awesome.
it is. It's such a classic. It's like almost like a timeless film. And we can relate to it in what we're doing in our profession right now in product marketing. Neo says to, well, it's Morpheus says to Neo, time is always against us in the Matrix. And it was like one of the first times that Neo stepped into the Matrix, and, he was sort of learning how to sort of fight the agents and, be able to quickly do their mission and then be able to escape the agents and be able to come out. If we were to use that example in product marketing, like think about it, a product marketer's plate is very full. Meetings, I'm in meetings most of my day. That's something that I'm looking to sort of try to climb out of and advocate for getting more time to get actual work done. Um, and then there's that legwork that you're doing, speaking to your various different key stakeholders, from product to sales to other marketing folks, into your leadership teams as well, to understand what their vision is for their customers, and then what the actual customers want, what's actually going on with the product. That takes a lot of prep work, right? It's almost like being a professional athlete, where you see them perform really well in their games, but then you don't actually see all the extra steps that they did to exercise and get in form and practice for the game. And that's really what a product marketer is doing to make all of that happen. So now imagine when it comes to the tactical and the execution piece. So now I know my positioning, I know my messaging, I know what I need to speak about in my assets. The last thing I want to do is be able to jump through 20 different versions of PowerPoints to be able to update them and make that happen. And so something like an Asset Mule is now coming in, allowing me to go in to those specific pages, make the changes I need, and set it and forget it almost to a degree, right? Because now I know that the assets that I needed to update are updated, and my field is going to be able to get what they need and they're able to move forward, right? Because the buck ideally is supposed to stop with the product marketer in terms of what that story is and how it should be told. Because, for anyone that's listening to this podcast, it's not about, control and power and saying, like, hey, like, it's what I say and that's it. There's good reason behind it. It's about wanting to help the rest of the sales and the marketing and even the product teams and the rest of the teams as well. You also have customer marketing, right? And you have the support team. Basically, we're doing all the hard work and the legwork to make sure that everything is accurate and in place, so that all you have to do is grab what you need, understand what we're talking about, and go take it and run with it. And so version control is so important. And in order to achieve that version control, I want to be able to have the least amount of steps. I just want to be able to focus on the storytelling and not have to focus on those 20 different decks and then who might have those decks, right? And so I think Asset Mule is like this little treasure trove, like this little secret in the industry for product marketers that the quicker we discover it, the easier our jobs could be. And then we can actually focus on our meat and potatoes, right? Which is the storytelling aspect. So that's my perspective. And that's taking 17 years of real life experience and sharing with you those pain points and how I have to quickly overcome it.
Well, first of all, thank you for for the kind words, and we're certainly focused on solving this for product marketers. If you were to think about why product marketers are, at least in my couple years now digging into this function and really trying to learn as much as possible about it, I keep hearing, oh, we want to be strategic, we want to focus on strategic stuff and not get boggled down into these day-to-day tasks, which it seems like you sort of alluded to it, right? Where salespeople are like slacking you, hey, I need a one pager for this and that and all that, right? How do you start to set the expectations of how sales can interface with you, right? Are there SLAs saying, hey, it's going to take, I don't know, 3 days if after requesting a deck or a one pager or whatever, and this is the level of personalization that you can realistically expect from me as a PMM? Because I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but like, you have, let's say, I don't know, 50 salespeople. It's impossible, right? Even 5 salespeople, if you think about the number of prospects that they're engaged with, like, it would be impossible to create a personalized asset for each prospect, for each salesperson. Of course, we're working on that. I know there's other organizations working on that. AI might change the game a bit, but historically, right? So, any ways to kind of set the right expectations from these external stakeholders? So, outside of the PMM function, such as sales, such as you mentioned, success and support.
George, you asked the $100 million question now, and I think that's great. And it's so great that even you're thinking about it and you're bringing that perspective to our listeners as well. I think that expectation has to come from top down and then also go across the org as well. And so, what do I mean by that? Um, I've seen it all when it comes to product marketing, right? Like Series A to F startups, all the way into these super big tech companies where really being able to turn around something is super important because there's a stress on, we have to be customer obsessed and we need to have lots of bias for action. And I think all of those things are important to keep in mind. But I think it's important to give the product marketer some runway. So whether the leadership team is aware of this, or if you as a product marketer have to go to them and advocate for yourself and say, hey, look, like, okay, you got me on board. This is the X number of requests that I get in daily or weekly or monthly. I'm going to go work on these important pieces. It's going to take me, like, between the research and the strategy, if you want like a full fleshed out deck, it's going to take me this much time. And I would rather update these pieces of collateral every, you could say something like a month, right? Ideally, that's what I would wish for everyone, because you can't sit there and update everything all the time, every single week or even every 2 weeks. I think it's like you need to have some sort of cadence. So I think that's important to be able to advocate for that and then set that expectation then across the board as well, where with those different teams that are relying on your materials, like, hey, you can expect this updated deck by the end of the month. Like, you have this special request for me. I see like I'm getting 5 other requests that are similar to this. I can prioritize this, but then you'll have it by the end of the month. In other instances, it also there's that it depends answer too, right? Because if you have a C-suite member or V-suite member who's like, we're trying to close this big sales whale, and we need you to be able to review this deck or be able to take a look at it. If you give yourself enough runway where you had that opportunity to build out the decks and flesh it out properly, ideally, it won't be that much work then to be able to go in and be able to take a look at who the customer is, what they're pitching to them, what they want, and then be able to give your sort of edit or amendment to the deck. And so that's a really great way to do that. And I think that helps with sanity, right? The higher up you go, I think there's always going to be VC and suite seat members that are going to be a bit needy and they're going to want things like immediately. But I think to be able to set the expectations with them is important. And then the larger, more matrix organizations that you go into, I think there needs to be setting expectations there too, because now you're dealing with the quantity, right? Like you're kind of talking about the exponential number of assets that you might have to deal with, and then the number of people that are coming at you. Now imagine that in a matrix organization where even though there might be other team members like that are doing sales enablements and things like that, now you may not be the person that's creating the deck end to end, but then you still need your expertise to come in and be able to review it, right? So that same vein of thinking applies to startups, to matrix organizations, and it needs to have that conversation early on going into your leadership. So hopefully that helps for the listeners, and like I'm curious what you think about that approach as well.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't. I've always. I should say that I did work at Twitter, sort of like, I don't know. I think we were like 1,000 or so people. So that was the largest organization that I had been a part of ever. Um, so it does resonate with me that being able to set those right expectations, regardless of your size, but understanding that the volume is going to be much higher, right? And the nuances are going to be different, depending on the size and the structure of the organization. I think one thing that I ask myself is, when does the organization get to a certain size or level where the PMM just focuses on more strategic messaging or positioning, or research work and those sort of things, versus doing uh creation of decks, right? Or is it like, I mean, you're at Amazon, right? Like, super large. Is it the largest organization, I think, in the world, right? I think. Are PMMs still tasked with that kind of work? And the reason why I ask is because we've seen in our research over the last several months that the larger the organization, the less dependency it seems like that sales has on individual PMs to actually create the assets or manage those projects, and that there may be like more specialized roles. So so there may be the sales enablement team that's doing it, or it's maybe some kind of function underneath content marketing. Or I've also seen like PMMs that are specialized in sales enablement. And so when you just kind of reach out to them, there may be 10 of them. There's maybe only one or two that are completely focused on sales enablement. So I'm curious to see, like, how do you know from the external, what type of organization will demand what type of structure of that team?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that goes into now the $1 billion question, right? You come in as a product marketer into an organization, and now you're trying to figure out what your breadth and scope is. And it gets tricky sometimes, right? In a like as you may know, in startups or even in big tech companies, they still behave like startups. So you're still wearing a bunch of different hats. I think it's helpful to have all the skill sets in your back pocket to understand what it means to be able to do sales enablement and how to build those things out, so that if your feet is ever put to the fire, you know what to do and how to quickly turn that around. But that quick turnaround, like living in a fire hose and living in like these sort of like fire drills all the time, is not ideal. And let's be real, George, when you're in those fire drill moments daily, there's very little time for strategy, right? Because you're busy reacting, right? It's like if we go back to the analogy of the professional athlete, the Olympian, in my case, I love tennis. And it's like, can I really play a game strategically and understand how to execute if all I'm doing is just trying to run up to the ball and try to defend it and just try to return the ball over to the other side of the racket? So it's one of those things where if the leadership team is not going to spell that out for you, you have to sort of like get a feel for it, where you're understanding like, are they more strategic right now? Are they more reactive?
Mm.
And if they are more reactive, then what am I going to do and what am I going to prioritize? So it's like coming up with your own roadmap in terms of that. I think to answer your sort of bigger question of like what kind of organizations require what, I think, and this is where the experience comes in, right? Like seeing this for 17 years, startups usually end up being very reactive, especially when they're like series A to C. I think series D also, like, you're still kind of in that reactive mode. Then when they start specializing in their products and their customer segments, that's when you can start being a little bit more discretionary and say like, I'm going to work on these specific decks for these specific customers, and then we can sort of borrow and steal for some of the other
Mm.
segments, right? And so it's kind of like this rinsable, repeatable model. When you get into these big tech companies, you may or may not have other orgs that are helping you. So there are salespeople, there's sales enablement, there's sales training, and you have to feel out the relationship with them, right? Like, what are they looking for from you? Like, are you the person that can bring them information and bring them some slides and then they can use that and then build out from the rest? Or are you going to sort of be there, sort of just reviewing a little bit? I don't want to use the word passively, but being sort of one of the reviewers of the deck to just be like, okay, this is accurate, or just put this in or don't put this in. You have to feel that relationship out. It's sort of not set in stone. So this is where product marketing needs to flex out their EQ, if you will,
Mm.
and start building out the relationships that way. Sometimes, George, you kind of have cross wiring that goes on where it's like um, they were used to these departments, including sales and products and marketing, even were used to not having a product marketer. So they were going directly to each other to get the information they need, right? And so then how do you recreate those relationships and those sort of
Mm.
chain of sort of, I don't want to say chain of command, but chain of information. So where do you insert yourself as a product marketer into these relationships and tell them like, hey, I'm here. Like, you don't have to do those extra steps anymore. I can help you. Like, I'll have that structure in the middle. I can sort of be the middle of the sort of wheelhouse, or what do they say, the linchpin.
Mm.
And I can sort of help flow the information that way and make sure that
Yeah.
you have the accurate information you need. And so that also requires being a bit of a pioneer and exploring those relationships, understanding what they're doing, where you can provide value and still be able to stay in scope, right? Because if you're a giver and it's really fun for you to be able to step in and help people, you need to figure out how to do it in a way where you also don't spread yourself thin.
Mm.
Because remember, we have all those other meetings going on, we have all those other research intake like situations, and then you're working on a whole bunch of other different projects as well, right? So how do you do this that's super strategic? And I think it sort of begs the question of, if you have mentors or if you have these sort of trainings, to come in and bring those questions in and like be able to work that out. And that's something I love doing with the Product Marketing Institute. It's like, let's workshop this out because these are really important questions. And I myself didn't necessarily have a mentor to show me those things. And so it was a lot of learning and troubleshooting on the go, then to be able to come up with a solid roadmap for myself where whatever situation I step into, now I'm able to handle it. But it is a lot. Product marketers are doing a lot. And I think companies like yours and this podcast like yours is helping bring awareness to why the role is so challenging. And it doesn't necessarily have to do with the person, the product marketer not being experienced enough. It's just there's a lot of different things happening. So how do you take that multitasking and how do you turn it into a rinsable, repeatable roadmap, right? That you can go in and hit the ground running.
Yeah, I've seen product marketers, I think, like, I don't know, me, I don't want to be negative, but I'm gonna say, like, be treated a bit unfairly, where they're getting pulled into like multiple areas, and then I've seen some get let go, right? Because they're not doing their job. And the fact of the matter is, they were, these instances that I'm specifically remembering, and the issue was that they were focused on a different set of jobs to be done that, let's say, leadership was asking for, and these were like very intricate projects. But then sales, for example, is complaining that they're not getting, you know support and these sort of things. And so it was really a matter of prioritization. And it was really sad in these cases where I saw them doing great work, but it wasn't highlighted. And I think part of it, one thing I will say on behalf of these individuals that I'm thinking about, is like, they didn't do a good job of actually setting boundaries, setting expectations, and managing up, right? Managing up, I should say, managing at all sides, right? And that was probably, in those particular instances, their downfall, because in that particular role, because they were super smart, and again, they were doing what they were working on as the highest priority. They were doing a great job on, but again, they got this, like, unfair rap, right? So you mentioned EQ. I mean,
Yeah.
we don't talk about EQ enough, right? I love to get into the kind of like esoteric stuff a little too much. You mentioned the Matrix, um, but uh, but it is a key skill set, right? That emotional intelligence to be able to manage people and not also step on toes, because we are humans, and we get our egos get in the way and those sort of things, which could be an entirely other episode there. So, but I just wanted to
Which
highlight
I'm
that.
happy to jump into with you on another episode.
Absolutely. Let's do it. I think we should probably do a workshop on being a EQ savvy PMM, right? Particularly that role. So, those are some of the things that really surfaced for me, as you were sort of articulating, kind of how this function should coexist within the entire organization.
Yeah, that's such a good point. See, you're so intelligent for bringing this up, and I don't think I've probably heard this in any other podcast. So good for you for to bring awareness on this. Product marketing is becomes a very political role very quickly. I don't like politics. I like to use the word diplomacy, right? And you mentioned some other words like managing expectations, creating boundaries. It's tricky because there is this research part that I mentioned, right? There's a reality, there's a market reality of what the customer wants and what the product is actually good at doing. And then you also have leaders that have very specific visions of where they want the product, whether it may be there or may not be there. So there's this delicate balance of now, as a product marketer, you're balancing the truth of the product with now trying to meet it towards the vision of what these founders and these leaders want it to be. And that's really hard. And so when the leaders are asking for something, it's like, what do you prioritize, right? Like, do you prioritize that, or do you try to set expectations where it's like, I'll give you these things, but then there's this reality of like now sales being really upset because they need other things that they're losing deals on, right? So you might be asking for this, and this is a future sort of view of the product, but we also have to now come back down to earth on what the actual product is right now and what we can do to close the sale. That is like, if you can balance those two things out, as a product marketer, then I would say like 80% of your work is done. All that other stuff, like you're able to, go into the motions and be able to do the tactical and the execution. But that piece is, it takes some time, some experience to be able to develop that out. And you're sort of like, kind of like this. If I use the analogy of an Oreo cookie, you're kind of the cream in the middle, and you're trying to be like just holding these two sort of teams together, right? Sales needs some things, and then the leadership needs also some things too, because they're pitching out to their board, or they're pitching out to other investors that they're trying to raise money from. And so it's this balancing act that you're constantly doing. And it can get a little tiring sometimes. And so you kind of have to come back and revisit and re strategize your roadmap as well, right? Of like, what am I going to do and how am I going to do this? And how do I do this where I also can get like 8 hours of sleep and still have somewhat of a life? Because it's really demanding, right? There's that
Yeah.
elements that I don't think maybe is highlighted enough, like how taxing and demanding this role is, and how do you, you know, keep yourself sort of balanced, get the important things that you need get done, and you could still enjoy the role as well. And I think that's an important conversation to have too, which I'm happy to like do with you in future conversations, because that's kind of like hitting now like sort of the deep part of product marketing,
Mm.
right? That, like we're all as an industry like talking about defining it and what it does, but like how do we dig deeper into these sort of deeper issues, which will, once you resolve it, you can end up having better product marketing strategy, not just for yourself, but for the entire org as well, right? So, yeah.
Awesome. Sana, thank you so much for being on the show. I know we we're coming up here on the top of the hour, but I feel like we could continue to talk for hours here. If folks wanted to follow you on social media, maybe check out the magazine, or check out some of the future initiatives. I know we've been talking about doing some workshops in New York City, and then also virtually, and who knows beyond that. What are the best URLs or channels to reach you?
Sure. Thank you for asking. So productmarketingmagazine.com, you all can go on that and check that out. And yeah, feel free to reach out to me on social media on linkedin.com/in/Sana Ahmed. And for the podcast too, you're welcome to go to anchor.fm/product marketing podcast. I believe it pushes it out to other places like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc. And when you read the magazine, you'll be able to catch my email there as well, sana@sanamed.com. So feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to hear from people, see what they think about the podcast and magazine. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to doing workshops with Asset Mule and with you, George. I think it's exciting. I think you guys are doing really great work, and I'm happy to be able to help bring that to light with even some of the awesome topics that you've surfaced in this podcast as well.
Awesome. Well, have a wonderful day. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Take care.